Today on Rates and Barrels, Jason Collette joins the show for our first Fantasy Friday of the 2026 season. We get ready for the waiver wire pickups coming up on Sunday. Let's go. Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Friday, April 3rd. Derek Van Riper here with a special guest co-host. It is Jason Collette. You've heard his voice on The Sleeper in the Bust. You've read his work at RotoWire and many other places, going as far back as the Roto Junkie forums, right? Is that where it all started for you, Jason?
That is where it all started, way back in 1999.
Whew. 1999.
Yeah.
I think that was around one of the first years I played fantasy baseball, and it was just public league on Yahoo, not competitive, but the very, very beginning of my fantasy baseball days. So great to have you with me today. We've got some baseball news folks should know up top. We're going to dig into some of your early observations of the Tampa Bay Rays. Rays Brewers just had a Spider-Man meme sort of series in Milwaukee earlier this week, so we both had our eyes on that. I wanted to figure out what we've learned about this Rays team these first couple of series. A couple good mailbag questions came in, one in particular about what we're using to think about our pitching matchups this time of year, because it's only 2 series. So I think that's a really pertinent thing people are thinking about right now. And then we'll do a weekend waiver wire preview, as we do most Fridays, digging into some of the more interesting players people might be thinking about adding and dropping leading into or over the course of the weekend. Always great when the waiver run falls on a holiday. I feel like that's one of my biggest complaints about Sunday waivers, is that you have a few different holidays in the spring and summer that usually, always in the case of Easter, but usually you're dealing with 2 or 3 holidays a season, and this is the first big one right away.
See, I unsuccessfully tried to argue for moving Fab to Thursday night in one of my home leagues. For that particular reason, weekends get buried up. Nothing happens on a Thursday, so that, that way you can still get the guy and set your weekend lineup. And then there's not that, we rarely get that surprising Friday morning, this guy's injured news. But we often get it Monday morning, this guy's hurt type of situation. So I unsuccessfully lobbied. It's like, hey, just switch it to Thursday. Why? Why not? Why does it have to be Sunday? But it ended up getting shot down. I will try again next year. I do have one league that runs on Saturday nights. And the only problem I have with that is I often forget about it because everything else is on Sunday.
Yes, I am the commissioner of one keeper league right now, and it has Thursday night into Friday pickups. It's had it for 7 or 8 years. I love it. It is the best change you can make to in-season weekly moves. I think as soon as you get people to try it, they'll wonder why they ever ran it on Sundays. But we are caught in a world that revolves around Sunday pickups for our weekly leagues, so we do our waiver previews on Friday. Also, from a content perspective, like the way all fantasy baseball shows work would actually be much better for everybody if we ran the waivers Thursday night into Friday. So.
Oh, 1,000%. It's like Scott Jenstead and Jeff Erickson on the RotoWire Sunday Night Podcast. It is built around getting that data, getting that report, NFBC, and talking about that right then. They're first out of the gate. They're West Coasters. They have that advantage. Like by the time that Fab runs, I'm an East Coaster. I'm an old East Coaster. I'm pretty much in bed, so I'm listening to that the next morning. But it's not actionable work because it's hey, lineups are being set. But if, like you said, running Thursdays and you've got something to look at for Monday, I know a lot of commissioners are listening to this show, and you just heard Derek say it's one of the best moves you could ever make. And I know my commissioner listens to this show, so listen in, tune in. Let's go.
And think about it. Every Sunday when you're just busy, holidays or not, or something's going on. You're up at the lake, you're on vacation, you got a kids tournament play, something's going on. Weekends are just busy. Leave weekends for the rest of life. Watch games, think about your teams, but do the work midweek. Okay, rant aside. We have some details on the Connor Griffin extension, the agreement. It's not signed yet. Reportedly a 9-year, $140 million deal, very similar to the deal Jackson Merrill signed with the Padres a few years back, and already tops the record set by Colt Emerson for a player with no Major League service time that was set earlier this week. Just curious, Jason, as you've thought about the overall snapshot of deals like this spanning about the last 10 years or so, the conversations are not very nuanced on the outcomes. It's more like, that was a terrible deal, and this is a heist for the team. And I think it's kind of a mixed bag, actually, because some of the names that didn't pan out, people have forgotten about Evan White and Jonathan Singleton in a lot of circles, right? Like, those deals happened long enough ago where I feel like front offices modeled things and thought about things a lot differently. Like, the amount of information you have about players before they arrive in the big leagues is completely different today than it was at the beginning of the era that we're even looking at for these deals.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think back to how far we've come. When Evan Longoria signed his deal with Tampa Bay, it was a 6-year, $17.5 million deal. And he signed that 5 days into the 2008 season. And there were a couple of things for that. One, that as the team that was balling on an extreme budget at that point, it's like that helped them shape the success of the franchise for years to come because of that. And then the other quote that came out of that was Eric Kinske. You could argue Eric Kinske may be the MVP of the franchise, but he told Evan Longoria when Longoria was like, "Hey, what do you think?" He's like, "Kid, never turn your back on your first fortune." And that was the advice that he gave Longoria. And Longoria signed that deal, and then he ended up getting a second deal. But it's kind of crazy to go from a 22-year-old getting a 6-year, $17.5 million to a 19-year-old getting $140. It's like how much things have evolved. And you have to wonder with the upcoming labor agreement, that being reworked, how that's impacting this rush to get these kids signed in regard. It's for me, I always look at it's mutually beneficial. Control costs for the player, for the organization rather, but from the player, I mean, what if, especially if you're a pitcher, not that Connor Griffin is, but it's like, what if things go wrong? You mentioned the Evan White situation, Jonathan Singleton. I mean, those were low end risk, but this is guaranteed money unless they do something off the wall stupid, it gets the contract voided. This is guaranteed money, so I see it as a mutually beneficial thing, and good for the sport.
Yeah, I think it can definitely be a win-win, and when it's a player that has a ceiling like Griffin's, you can dream on the possibility of it being a massive win for the Pirates. I get that, but $140 million, nothing to sneeze at, and when you sign a deal like that when you're 19, you can get a nice second payday. If Connor Griffin's the player people expect him to be, think about what the money's going to look like at the end of that deal. He could get another $250, $300 million plus after that. So long into the future. Don't have to worry about that. He's going to debut by the time you actually hear this pod. We talked about that a bit on Thursday. Pirates have their home opener. I think it's a 4:12 Eastern start time. Is there a story behind that? I couldn't figure out why it was 4:12.
The area code for Pittsburgh's 412.
Okay, there you go. I figured if there was, you'd know.
I live in Charlotte, and a lot of the games for the Charlotte Knights start at 7:04 because that is our area code. But it's starting at 4:12 on opening day because that's the area code for Pittsburgh.
I think we may have started a Milwaukee game at 4:14 once for the same reason, for the 4:14. But I also remember at one point the White Sox had a promotion with 7-Eleven, so their start times were always 7:11 p.m. Just, why not get that synergy going, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it's a thing, too, because we just had the prospect showcase here in Kannapolis. It was the Winston-Salem Dash, which is the advanced A, versus the Kannapolis Cannonballers, which is A, the White Sox. And the ticket prices were $3.12. 312 is the Chicago area code. So, yeah, I guess it's one of these marketing tricks that they're trying right now. But I have to tell you, for $3.12, I took my son to that game. So.
Hey, I mean, look, in this world, area code pricing, generally a good thing, right? I mean, I think
yes, indeed.
I'm happy with that. So other baseball news you should know. I just saw this one fly by on RotoWire from our Nationals writer, Spencer Nussbaum. James Wood was playing through multiple injuries last year. I love that came out on April 3rd. But I still like that context because I think when I think about players, I'm always trying to build a complete picture of the profile, trying to add as much detail as I can to past seasons that help me understand why the season turned out a certain way. As it pertains to James Wood, there's not much we can do about it now. He's 100% rostered. Maybe you can go trade for him, I guess, in a long-term league, thinking that there's nowhere to go but up. But genuinely curious, just your overall assessment of what Wood has done so far as a player, because he's so unique. Like, he's such an odd player with that opposite field sort of approach. And it seems like this Nats organization has more of a philosophy of do the things you're great at rather than trying to squeeze everybody into the same mold.
I love that philosophy too. It's like, it's tough to be, in the professional world, there's generalist and specialist. There's people that specialize, they're great at one thing, and they just eschew the other things. And there's generalists that can do a little bit of everything. And I like the approach that some of these teams are doing with pitchers and with hitters. It's like, hey, this one thing you do really well, just keep doing it, lean into it, and we'll worry about everything else. And maybe these injuries that Wood had, maybe it's like, all right, maybe we excuse 5% of the strikeout rate for something like he's trying to compensate for all the other things going on. But that's ultimately where things are, how much of that is going to continue with strikeouts, because when you strike out 220 times in a season, that's tough to sustain. But the raw abilities that James Wood has is just so exciting. Is one of the reasons I took him. We mentioned me started playing in 1999. 1999, me would have run away from a player like that. I was so about, if you can't make contact, forget it, I am out. 2026 me is like, yeah, let's go.
Isn't it funny how you can change over time as far as the things that were deal breakers in a profile become less scary, maybe because the game completely changes every decade, it seems like at this point. But yeah, it was knee and quad soreness. I think when you look at first half, second half splits, 278, 381, 534 in the first half last year, looked like a first or second rounder coming into 2026 coming off that, and then hit 223, 301, 388 in the second half with a 39% K rate. He struck out 27.6% of the time during that great first half. Easy to see where just not feeling great consistently could lead to a prolonged half-long slump. So that's kind of where my head's at as far as saying, hey, let's just see what this year brings. If it's more balanced, then I think we can attribute a lot of those second half struggles to the injuries and also just the inexperience too. I think there's part of that growth that all players go through, even high-end talents like James Wood. Jason, let's get into some early observations of the Rays. The Brewers took 2 of 3 in that series, but it definitely felt like looking into the mirror in a lot of ways, just because the way these teams are built, their philosophies. Matt Arnold, being the head of the front office in Milwaukee, came out of the Rays organization several years ago. These two teams were first and second in stolen bases last year. The Rays had 194 steals. The Brewers had 164. The Brewers have been running wild so far in their first 2 series. I mean, they got, I think, 7 bags alone in a game that Reese McGuire started behind the plate for the White Sox, but they have the early league lead with 15. The Rays so far have only attempted 3 steals. So what's going on there? This can't be a philosophical shift. What have you seen in these first 2 series?
Yeah, definitely don't feel like it's a philosophical shift, but there's always multiple inputs. When you're looking at stolen bases, managerial intent, matchups, and who's getting on base. So if we know the manager stayed the same, so we can take managerial intent out of it. Matchups. So I would look at Milwaukee running the way they did. You just mentioned Reese McGuire, not a good throwing catcher. And, they got 7 of their 15 steals there. But in the matchup against Tampa Bay, only the Marlins are worse in throwing out runners since the start of 2025. The duo of Nick Fortes and Hunter Fiducia, and even going back last year with Danny Jansen, the Rays just have not done a good job of controlling the running game. The Marlins are on their own level of bad, but the Rays have been the worst team in the American League, so it did not surprise me to see Milwaukee take advantage of that situation. Meanwhile, Tampa Bay's matchups have been a neutral St. Louis team and a Milwaukee team that's better than average at controlling the running game. So that's a piece of it. But then it's like, who's getting on base? I was looking at Baseball Reference. They have a team base running report, and they call stolen base opportunities when the runner's on first or second and there's nobody in front of them on the next base. And then you look at who's leading. The Rays are 4th in the league in that particular category right now, behind the Astros, the Angels, and the Mets. But then if you look at an individual level, Yandy Diaz is first. Yandy Diaz is not stealing any bases. Jonathan Aranda's next. Aranda's not stealing any bases. And then you have Chandler Simpson, who's done a good job of getting on base, and he has 2 of the 3 attempts. And then 5th is Johnny DeLuca, who's been caught in his only attempt. But your speedier guys just haven't had the opportunities. Ben Williamson's barely been on base. Cedric Mullins has barely been on base. So they just haven't had the right people on base. So that's why I just chalk it up to a little bit of all of that. Mostly it's just who's getting on base right now. The front-loaded part of the lineup, Caminero and Aranda and Diaz, those guys are not there to steal bases, but the guys they do need to steal bases aren't getting on base enough.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing that can definitely pop in a small sample size, so really important to keep an eye on that. Now, the other thing we've wondered about with the Rays, pretty much since the beginning of Rates and Barrels. We're in year 8 of the show, and I think 90% of our build a bench segments have been based on the Rays and how their roster fits together. We have some clues, right? The playing time battles through the first 2 series, they start to reveal themselves when the games begin to count. Junior Caminero, Yandy Diaz, Jonathan Aranda have started all 6 games. The only somewhat surprising name there would be Aranda, because they have seen, I think, 2 lefties so far. 5 starts for Cedric Mullins, Chandler Simpson, and Carson Williams. I think that's a pretty interesting group overall. And then 4 starts each for Nick Fortes and Ben Williamson. What's interesting to me is that not only have Mullins and Simpson both played 5 out of 6 games, they've both looked really good defensively in the outfield so far. One play that Mullins made in particular took away a double, maybe even a triple from Joey Ortiz, and it was the kind of play where the break he made on the ball was perfect, but he also still showed the speed to close in on a ball that if you were a skeptic like I was about Mullins still being good enough to stick in center field on a regular basis, it was like one play that eased a lot of those concerns. So
right.
Just thinking about the playing time mix for the key pieces here, like who's got a real up arrow for you in terms of how they've been used so far and how you expect them to continue to be used in these next several weeks?
Yeah, I think it's encouraging to see Aranda out there as much as possible. You know, if I was running the show, I'd have Diaz, Caminero, and Aranda out there as much as possible and live with the splits issues. Aranda may have some issues against some lefties, but his all fields approach helps somewhat neutralize that type of situation. You bring it up, the defense is a good point, because that was a point of emphasis for the club in the offseason, was to improve defense. Now, if you look at the early numbers, it's not showing. They're outs above average. They're 29th right now. They're having a rough start, but a lot of that is Junior Caminero making throwing errors. And for some reason, playing first base, that one I just didn't get. That came out of nowhere. Like, we're on the D-Rays Base Slack channel internally, we're like, where did this come from? Was he even working on first base in spring training off in the backfields? And all of a sudden, there he is in first base. So, defense is off to a rough start, but some of the acquisition of Ben Williamson was done to improve that defense. Carson Williams being able to make the opening day roster because Taylor Walls was hurt, that helps the defense. Cedric Mullins, as you've already attested to, has done some things, and Johnny DeLuca's look good out there as well. So hopefully the defense gets better, because that's right now it's impacting some of the pitching too. The bullpen situation's been a little shaky right now, and I would argue some of that has been the undue extra pressure that the defensive lapses have put on the bullpen.
So the semi-related question here is, what am I supposed to do with Jacob Melton in my redraft leagues? I thought there was a chance he'd break through, make the opening day roster, and have a role right away. And seeing how the playing time works right now, it almost feels like he's going to have to wait for an injury to actually come up and play enough to make an impact in a lot of leagues.
And it's a good thing he needs that time, to be honest. Like, he's off to a rough start. He has 13 strikeouts in his first 25 plate appearances heading into tonight's game, and he gets Zach Wheeler on rehab assignment tonight. So let's throw in 2 more strikeouts, possibly, maybe 3. So he's off to a rough start, and that really just extends the contact issues that Melton showed last year when he was with the Astros. So I don't feel like there's going to be any rush. Yes, he had a good spring training, and he turned a lot of heads, that type of thing, but he is off to a slow start. And so the good start from the outfield should help buy Melton some more of that time, so he's not being rushed up and say, okay, man, we made a big deal to acquire you in the offseason, get out there and do your thing. So I would slow roll your expectations on when Melton makes the club. I would not expect to see him coming up this month. And I'm right there with you. I believe he's on my AL labor roster and AL tout. But he's, he'll be on the bench for a bit.
Yeah, in those leagues, at least being 12-team mono leagues, deep enough to hold him, but I think even like in a 15-team mixed league right now, it's probably an easy cut this weekend for me, and I say that as someone that has about as much Jacob Melton as a person can have on rosters. So a misstep, but not a very costly one, because he was going late enough in drafts. On the pitching side, we saw Shane McClanahan out there against the Brewers this week. I'm curious, this version of Shane McClanahan, can we expect anything close to ratios he's put up in the past? This is a guy that has a 3.03 career ERA and a 1.10 whip, over a strikeout per inning, 460 Ks in 409 and a third big league innings. Have you come away impressed by what you've seen from McClanahan over the course of the spring and what we saw against the Brewers earlier this week?
So to put some numbers in context, I was looking at this the other day. The Major League Baseball has seen 1,221 pitchers pitch in between McClanahan's major league outings. The Rays have used 59 different pitchers in between the outings of McClanahan. That's how long he's been out. And so just that alone, putting that aside, it was great to see him back on the major league mound the other night. That was great. But incomplete grade, because I really would like to see where the fastball is. You know, when you look at everything he did, the secondaries look good. The fastball, you go look at his stuff plus grade for the outing, it was an 80. That's not good for the fastball. He was able to get away with it until the end. I would argue that maybe he should have come out after that untimely walk to Joey Ortiz there that set the table for that big inning with that situation. But we need to see where the fastball is going to be with McClanahan, because I was looking at Lance Brodkowski's write-up of it afterwards. It said arm angle's a little higher and the ride was a little less, and movement, everything else was just a little less. But that's what you would honestly expect from his first outing back after so long. So really want to see where that is. The secondaries grades look good on that, but the fastball is going to dictate where things go from there. So I did not see Ace McClanahan on the mound. I saw more of a mid-level rotation guy type of thing. But I want to see how the next matchup goes with him to see if that was just that first outing back jitters. It's one thing to pitch on a spring training mound. It's another one to get in front of 40,000 folks in a big stadium like that in Milwaukee. So I was encouraged, but at the same point, I see the risk moving forward.
I think a lot of what you're describing is similar to what we saw from Brandon Woodruff after a long layoff. And coincidentally, Woodruff had the ball for the Brewers in that start that McClanahan made. And the interesting thing about Woodruff is I feel like his command and his pitch mix were deep enough for him to make adjustments where they had a plan for him coming back from rehab that you could tell the fastball is going to be a source of homers more than it ever has been in the past. And hiding that pitch or locating it really, really well and just not throwing it to guys that are going to do the most damage on it is just part of what it is now. I think there's also, for McClanahan, like that question of, will the arsenal add something? Like, will he have to compensate by adding other pitches? Does he have the feel for spin to do something like that? Because that might be part of the next steps that he has to go through in order to get similar results, even if he can't get back to the level he was at. Do you think we're seeing, or do you think we've seen a template that the Rays might follow in terms of usage with the way they handled Drew Rasmussen a year ago, where, they taper him down at certain points and kind of back off him, try to get him through a full season, but really kind of mold certain parts in the middle to where McClanahan has a stretch where he's not even really being used like a traditional starter? Because I could see that also being something that impacts his fantasy value at random points over the course of the year. Just trying to get him all the way through 2026.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening, and potentially right around the middle part of using the All-Star break as they did with Rasmussen. So coming into the season, part of the early plan that had been discussed was to limit the work that both Matz and McClanahan were doing and using piggyback guys, using Joe Boyle behind him, using Ian Seymour, but then the unexpected injury to Ryan Pepio put Boyle into the rotation, which adjusted those plans just a little bit. But that's why the Rays are carrying extra reliever, because they don't want Matz or McClanahan going too deep early on. But I could see it getting to a point this summer where they start looking at a certain point. I don't ever feel that Rasmussen was on a hard, fast workload situation. It was just more of, if we're going to go into the postseason, and they were really trying to do that last year, getting to that point, then they needed to make sure he was ready for that. And if there was a way to kind of save him in the middle, then they tried to do that. And I could see a similar thing happening with McClanahan this summer, where he comes out, like I said, if he would have come out after that Ortiz walk, that game may have gone a little bit different, but they tried to get one more out from him with Terang, who he had just struck out on 3 pitches the last time up. But Terang didn't let that happen in that third plate appearance.
Speaking of Rasmussen, it looks like he's got a change working right now. That it popped on Eno's new pitch chart that he put together yesterday. He threw it about 8% of the time so far. It looks like a power change to 89.1 is what he's averaging on that. So I imagine that's mostly just something he's going to have in the bag to keep lefties off balance, because it's so cutter 4-seam heavy against them otherwise.
Yep, that's how I look at it, because with this traditional arsenal, It's just what I love about watching him pitch is he's just so pitch efficient. People are like, oh, he doesn't strike out enough. I'm like, he doesn't want the strikeout. Watching him pitch, it's almost like he's in a race to get back in the dugout. I don't know if the seats are comfortable, but he is not out there to nibble and mess around. He just wants to work in the strike zone and hit his targets and get off the mound. And if that results in people making contact and that contact staying on the infield and becoming outs or easy fly balls, he doesn't care how he gets those outs. And so it's nice in this day and age where everybody's trying to pursue the strikeout and the infamous Blake Snell 30 pitch first inning type of situations. You rarely see those from Rasmussen because he is out there hitting his spots and doing what he can. And I would say it's almost like he knows he's kind of pitching on borrowed time. You look at any other pitcher with his injury history, and they're not having that level of success that Rasmussen has been able to sustain. So I figure, he's just out there enjoying it and doing what he can as long as his arm holds up.
Yeah, easy guy to root for, knowing what he's been through from a health perspective over the course of his career.
And he's getting ready to be a father here any day now. So he may miss his next start, by the way, because his wife is due any moment. They were worried that she may go into labor this last start. So that may be they may have already happened as you're listening to this, but he is he's got a child in the way.
That's right. Yeah, I think the early season paternity list, you can do the math, right? Like the All-Star break sort of lends itself to a lot of players, families welcoming new children around this time of year. So be prepared for that. That happens every year. We do our best to keep tabs on it, but sometimes you don't know until it's just like, and he's gone for a couple days, which totally makes sense. Last Rays question for you. Bullpen hasn't been great so far, but people here, of course, want to know, what is the hierarchy for save opportunities in this bullpen right now? And maybe why doesn't it work for Griffin Jax in short relief?
Quietly, I feel like Brian Baker is becoming the person. Well, you just look at usage. I was looking at usage this morning. So Brian Baker pitched on Saturday and Sunday back to back. And so this time of the season, we often see teams hesitant to use guys 3 straight. And so Kevin Kelly picked up that particular save on Monday because Ian Seymour had gotten, they wanted to bring Kevin Kelly in for the righty situation. So you had that. So he got a save. Griffin Jax has tried, but has blown. Some of that has been defense, plain and simple. One of it was a poorly located fastball to Alec Burleson. He just totally missed the spot and Burleson crushed it. But I thought it was noteworthy that Baker did not pitch at all in the Milwaukee series. And so it's like, he's going to pitch tonight because he has not pitched since Sunday. So he's going to pitch tonight against Minnesota in some capacity or another. But the fact that he did not work at all in that series tells me that he may be the primary guy for the 9th inning. He looked good in spring. He looked good after the acquisition from Baltimore last year. They like what they have there. And I feel like they want Jax to work and maybe possibly more than the 1 inning situation. But I just thought it was noteworthy here early that Brian Baker is sitting there and has not been used since those back-to-back high leverage successful situations that he had in the St. Louis series.
Yeah, might be some opportunities out there in shallow leagues at least. I know Baker was a big pickup in the first weekend and relatively cheap because of the uncertainty too, but that price is only going to go up, especially if you can find a save or two in that weekend series against the Twins. We are going to hit a quick break. When we come back, we're going to open up the mailbag and talk about what we use to estimate team offenses when we're looking at pitching matchups. Welcome back to Rates and Barrels. Got a great mailbag question here from Carrot in our Discord, Jason. Carrot wanted to know what we use to estimate team offense when we're considering a starting pitcher. WRC plus, xWOBA, runs. Also points out that it probably varies over the course of the season, and at some point there's enough data to consider handedness. After the season has been going for a while, what's the rolling period you consider? Is it 4 to 6 weeks, or is it more than that? And early in the season, do you just use projected stats when thinking about these matchups?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of yes to everything there. So a lot of it can be projected stats. I'll go back to the point I was making about the running game when I'm looking at a situation. So if I have a team, so let's say Milwaukee's going to Miami, I'm really worried about rolling a Miami pitcher out with Milwaukee's loving to run against a team that cannot control the running game. So I'm trying to fade all those particular pitching matchups, even if it's Alcantara coming off a Maddox situation. Just like that particular situation scares me. So I look for those types of inputs. I do like looking at the last 14, 21 days rolling data just to see what, expected stats. Maybe somebody's, their actual numbers are not doing well, but under the hood, they're making good contact and those situations come out. But you have to look at a variety of levels. But honestly, for me, this early, it comes down to running matchups. And especially if you're looking at a Miami situation or if it's, Tampa Bay and they're this Minnesota situation, they don't tend to run too much. But I would say one of the teams that's quietly along the same line is the Rockies. The Rockies ran a lot in the spring. In fact, of all the I'm using air quotes new managers because Warren Schaefer was is a new full-time manager. But of all the new teams, the new managers running teams, the Rockies had the biggest change from last spring training to this spring training for running. And early on, they're out there running. So that's another factor to consider if you're going, hey, it's just the Rockies. Philly's going to Denver this weekend, and that's not an easy team to run on, but it's at the same time you got that Coors Field risk along with a team that now likes to run more. So it's just one of those things to keep an eye on.
Coors Field in the early part of the season especially is something I've come around to maybe taking more shots in with my pitching. Some of that is also this era of Rockies being pretty far below some of the scarier lineups we've seen over the years also. It's a group that you just, maybe there's 3 or 4 guys in there that you see as quality regulars, but it's a top-heavy lineup. It's maybe similar in quality to the Guardians, but they don't have a Jose Ramirez in that Rockies lineup either, so that's why it's a notch below, and then you add in, the environmental effects and all that. All those things are still kind of weighing on my mind with the Rockies. They're just not as scary as they used to be, and weather actually factors into that too. I know it's been warm a lot of places earlier this year. People were asking about the impact of the ball on early home run totals, and I thought, we can look at the drag coefficients. Baseball Savant keeps that chart handy all the time, so you can pop that up right away and just see, is it really the ball? Or you can also just dig around a little bit and see if it's unseasonably warm a lot of places. And generally, I would say it's been warm in a lot of parts of the country early on this year, too. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about early season matchups.
Yeah, the drag coefficient, Pete, that's a good piece to bring up because I was looking at that. Joe Sheehan was mentioning it yesterday, and it's pretty much right on line with where it was over the course of last year. So it's almost like in previous seasons we've seen some variability with the drag coefficient, but it seems like right now they've kind of stabilized that. But it is right on line with where things were last year, and that's actually something I usually write about at RotoWire about this time of year because we typically only need about 10 to 15 games of data to get a good idea of what the season's going to look like for batted ball. So that's something I've looked at it the last couple of years. And you can see, like the last time we had a big breakout, you could see it coming. Like in hindsight, you go back and look at 2019, and that early data was like, yep, there it is. And then when we had that dead pocket in 2023, you could go back and look, and you could see again that was there. So early data, there's a lot. It usually takes a lot to stabilize some things, but you get a pretty good idea of how the ball is going to perform over the course of a year by how it's performing early.
Yeah. And if you get a big shift like later in the year, maybe eventually a new batch is in circulation or
That's
something.
happened.
But yeah, it's the ball beat is not Eno's favorite beat. So I'm glad we can have this conversation on a day where he's getting some much deserved rest. I was thinking about the time aspect of Carrot's question though too. Like as you move into the season, how much of a recent data slice do you think is actually valuable? And part of the reason why you don't always want to use the entire season is because the people in the lineup could change a lot. So I do think I'm toggling that almost based more on personnel. If you have a couple of major injuries, what does that lineup look like since those players were hurt? I think that's actually a case for using a smaller sample size when high quality players have gone missing for one reason or another.
Yeah, or if the schedule's been tilted, like the team's been on the road for 9 straight days. Like if you're using the Athletics are finally playing a home game tonight. Some of us who loaded up on that team because we wanted those sweet Sacramento numbers finally get to enjoy a first game in Sacramento. So if you're looking at that type of numbers, looking at the Athletics, say, wow, their offense is struggling. Well, they have not had a chance to play in their sweet, sweet home environment yet.
They've got a 50 WRC plus as a team through their first 2 series. Which,
if you take Langoliers out of that, I imagine how ugly that would be.
Yeah, he's just been the offense for the A's up to this point. But thanks a lot for that question, Carrot. Yeah, projections this early, I think, are still a really good tool to lean on. Question from the real Lord with an E, so more like the artist,
The
Lord.
musician.
The musician, yes. What do you make of Luisangel Acuña? Big increase in bat speed from 70.7 miles per hour last year to 74.2. Early on, it comes with a 287 XBA, 340 xWOBA, and 5.9% K rate. He's been unlucky in the early going with a 214 BABIP. Is there something to monitor for deep leagues? Another guy that Eno's never been that into, so a perfect player to bring up with you.
I would say I'm more interested in the mono league format, so in the AL format, because even when he's been playing, Acuña is hitting 8th or 9th, so he's still too far down. I don't know about you, but if I'm in my mixed leagues, 12 to 15, I try to avoid guys that are hitting 8th and 9th. So it's, unless I can put him on the bench. So yeah, I'm intrigued, and I was intrigued by Acuña during draft season. I believe I ended up with 2 shares of him across my 11 drafts. I did not get him in labor or tout because the room was more interested than I was, but definitely worth monitoring. Anytime somebody's making that type of a change, it's something you want to monitor to see what's happening. But the opportunity should be there. But it's not like, I mean, I know the White Sox are off to a slow start, but they've got talent in this organization. So it's like Chase Meidroth's doing his thing. They got Brooks Baldwin, Sam Antonacci's here in Charlotte and already off to a good start. And you expect to see Antonacci with the Major League roster here at some point here this season. So there's a lot of competition for playing time, and the fact that Acuña has played shortstop and center field is good for him. To be able to use that versatility, that same thing that Brooks Baldwin did last year, where Baldwin was playing all over the place. So that's going to help Acuña stick around with that. But I still feel that he's only an AL option.
Yeah, I think it's AL for now. I think if you were in a pinch, hey, he had a busy week and was going to play 6 times and you need some speed, there's probably a case for him in certain instances to pick him up in 15-teamers, but you're looking at him probably more as a streamer right now. Near top of the scale sprint speed, 97th percentile last year. I think most of the value is going to come from average speed. As Jason pointed out, he's going to have to move up in the order, though, to actually do something for you in the runs category. The good news about that bat speed going up is maybe it's non-zero power. I think in the past, Eno's pointed to that lack of pop as something that could keep Acuña in more of a utility role for the long haul. I see more of what some of our friends call a second division regular, term that I've ragged on in the past.
I love that term, though. I've heard you guys do it. I love that. It's like such an old baseball thing back when they had 16 teams and you were there in the top half or the bottom half. So first division or second division. I use it all the time.
I know. I know what it means, and it's actually okay. I just feel like maybe there's a better way to describe it. Like if you're a regular, you're actually a regular. Like you're good. Like you're good enough to play, but the quality of the team matters, right? Could you play on the Dodgers every day? Probably not. Could you play on the White Sox every day? Yeah. Okay. Second division regular. So it actually holds up pretty well. There's not a lot of old baseball jargon that actually holds up as well as that actually does. All right. Let's dig into a waiver preview because I put it way too much on the rundown for today. It's a problem of mine, despite doing this for several years now. So let's start on the pitching side. And what we've been doing on this show in recent years is sort of bunching players by how rostered they are. We use CBS for roster rates, just kind of a good overall snapshot. Clearly, the numbers are going to be different if you're playing in the NFBC. Some guys that are 60% rostered on CBS might be 100% rostered in the NFBC main event. I get that. I understand. We can't serve everyone with everything we say. But if you look at guys that are between that 60 and 80% threshold, you see Casey Mize, Ryan Nelson, Jose Soriano, who's come up a lot on the pod over the course of this week, Parker Messick, Mike Soroka, Brady Singer, Tyler Mahle, and Ronaldo Lopez. And I think some of those guys are being increased in roster rate. A few are actually sliding. I'm just kind of curious when you look near the top. These are kind of like 10 to 12 team league pitchers you'd be thinking about. Who stands out to you as actually being worth targeting early in a shallow league from that group?
I will say, as somebody who benched Parker Messick this week with the matchup against the Dodgers, that to me got my attention. The fact that he was able to have the success he did. And I would also, I'd like, despite the results of the matchup against Atlanta, Ryan Nelson is somebody I really like coming into the season. And so if somebody's going to drop Ryan Nelson, I would love to go pick him up after the rough outing yesterday. I watched an inning of it, and he got himself into trouble, missing some location. But again, that was it's one outing. I liked what Ryan Nelson did towards the back half of last season and how he closed the season. So those were two names that got my attention. And then Reynaldo Lopez, while he's still sitting down there with 60% usage, he's looked good. And after making one start last year and then missing the rest of the season, we kind of forgot how good he was in 2024, especially front half. I know we faded down the stretch as that workload caught up with him, jumping from the bullpen to the rotation as he did. But Lopez has looked really good so far.
Yeah, and I think the key here in this group, you're often looking at the next couple of matchups, making sure those are good too, because you don't have to be locked in on these guys for the rest of the season. Lopez has the Angels on the road and the Marlins at home for his next two turns, both pretty good spots overall. The Angels can do damage, but they're not a lineup that I fear. Like I'll throw.
They strike out a lot too, so that's a good matchup for Lopez.
Yeah, like there's a little bit of like a risk reward component to it, but I'm more inclined to take that risk, especially if it's someone that has some swing and miss ability like Lopez does. I'm glad you brought up Nelson. His next two are at the Mets, at the Orioles. He's just weird. He's weird because he throws his fastball a lot. It's a high ride fastball, but it's a really high slot, and I don't know how it works as well as it does. The 3.39 ERA he put up last year and the 107 whip, like that doesn't quite seem sustainable to me, but I'm wondering if he's someone I'm just underestimating because of how unique he is.
Yeah, I feel that's, when we see all the different, the guys with the wider arsenals, I know Enos talked a lot about this, about some guys, instead of having that one quality, they're using multiple quantity pitches and doing that. And we're seeing more guys around the league doing this type of stuff. It's tough to add velocity, like despite what Taj Bradley going out and hitting 100 yesterday out of nowhere. Look at that. And so he's hitting 100 and throwing splitter and looking really good. But like I said, Ryan Nelson, the way he pitched in the second half of last season, making some changes and the results he was getting, I'm not discouraged by what happened in the outing last night in Atlanta. In fact, if somebody in your league is hitting the panic button and is already looking to make a trade or make a drop, I would be jumping all over that situation.
Yeah, built-in evergreen tip, always keep it on the drop lists in your league because sometimes people do make early season mistakes and you can capitalize by being quick to pounce on those players.
I was going to say your point earlier about looking ahead. That's one way to save your fab too. For those of you guys that may be in leagues where you haven't had that for you, looking ahead. So right now you're picking up a guy for a 1-start week, but it's a 2-start week next week, and looking at those matchups. That's how you save a little bit of money, and all that money helps.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time on the RotoWire projected starters grid, just looking ahead, trying to do that. I think that's a really smart way to try and protect that budget, as you said. The next group down, 40 to 60% rostered right now on CBS, includes names at the top like Clay Holmes, Emerson Hancock, who had that great start on Sunday night, Grant Holmes, who's actually going Friday in Arizona. We'll see how that turns out. Max Meyer, Matthew Liberatore, Joey Cantillo, Kyle Harrison, Bailey Ober, the recently mentioned Taj Bradley, and Randy Vasquez. So this group is also, like, to me, like when you're talking about winning on the margins, it's guys like this that you really need to get right. Like getting them in when they're in good spots, getting them out of the lineup or off your roster when they're not, and being quick to make adjustments if something massive changes in their profile. The point I tried to make earlier this week was that the gap between SP60 and SP100 is actually very small. And a lot of players that are below 60% rostered have the ability to sort of ping pong between those ranges for a variety of different reasons. So out of this cluster, who's kind of catching your eye right now, someone you want to try and go get where available?
So I don't need to say anything else about Matthew Liberatore on this particular podcast, and then Emerson Hancock probably would have got a little bit cheaper had he not gone out there on national television and just absolutely shoved. And so it's like that's going to be too rich for my blood. You mentioned about making substantive changes, and that's what really draws me into Taj Bradley. As much as he's burned me in the past, it's like he's throwing harder and he's added new pitches. Those are two really good things that you want to see. I'm not talking about picking up a guy and riding him the rest of the season, but until the league makes adjustments, then see what happens here. But that's really attractive. And then with the matchups, he's got Detroit and Toronto with that, so it's not great matchups, but it's still enough where he's done some really good work so far, and I'm curious to see how long he can run with this. So that's there, and then we saw Kyle Harrison pitch the other day. I liked what I saw from Kyle Harrison pitching, and he's got Kansas City, Washington, and Toronto for his next 3 matchups, and those are good matchups, especially with some of the lefty matchups he'll be able to take advantage of there. So Kyle Harrison's another guy that interests me on that list.
Yeah, we mentioned a tweak to that changeup, more drop on that pitch, and I think that's going to be really important for him. His matchups, he's got the Royals on Sunday, so if you're in a weekly league, you get one more look at him. That could influence how much you have to bid if he goes out there and pitches really well against the Royals. But home against the Nats for the next one, so even if you're thinking about short term, that's good. Maybe you're sitting him on the bench for a home start against the Jays after that Nats start, but just kind of planning ahead, really important to do here. Taj is so interesting to me. I spilled coffee on my keyboard this morning. I can't type Taj, apparently, unless I reach up and do it on the actual keyboard in front of me, so more data to come. But the problem with Taj Bradley that's been discussed on this show in the past was that everything is thrown hard. There's nothing that throws off the timing of opposing hitters. So if you get a lineup that handles velocity particularly well, those matchups can actually be extra difficult for Taj. And then, of course, at times, maybe all too often, he shows what we would maybe call reliever command, like location numbers that starters just typically don't get away with. But I think there's a few things working in his favor. One, the AL Central, which I love and respect, but also will pick on with pitchers because there are some lineups that just aren't that good. And while it's warm a lot of places, it's still cold and rainy and crappy in many parts of the Midwest right now. So I do think you can look at Taj, at least in the short term, and lean into this a little bit more than you would if this were happening in July.
Yeah, and that's why I'm encouraged with the splitters, because it's at least a change of plane pitch. Yeah, he's still throwing it hard, but it's at least changing everything else that he throws. I mean, we've seen what he's capable of. If you think back to August of 2024, that stretch in the summer where he was just absolutely unhittable and everything was working well. And then basically since then, up until recently, it's been the exact opposite. So we've seen, and it all comes down to how he locates what he has. But that's what's been encouraging with the splitter. At least it's a new offering that is somewhat of a change of pace. And, he never could really embrace the changeup. And if you can't throw a changeup with Tampa Bay, maybe that's why he got traded with things.
He scrubbed the sinker, it looks like, too. And it wasn't a pitch that he threw a lot, or maybe it was just a weird four-seamer. But the four-seamer just looks like it's been tightened up, has a little bit more ride. There's just there are nice changes in place here, and I'm curious to see where it goes.
Well, he's arm slots. He's made an adjustment with his arm slot, the way he's taking the ball, breaking the ball from his glove, and more of a straight back release than the curved arm release. So he's made some mechanical changes, made some repertoire changes, and got velocity changes. Those are typically 3 nice indicators. I know Eno's talked about it too. Those are 3 nice indicators of maybe something's there.
Yeah, the next start comes home against the Tigers. Definitely an in for that one. Road against the Jays, you're probably looking a little bit at the bench and just trying to see who else you have at your disposal. But a nice up arrow next to Taj Bradley's name. I'm going to circle Max Meyer as someone that's probably going to be falling off of rosters because he's got a really tough matchup against the Yankees. He was one of the guys that I talked a lot about during draft season. I want to have him on a lot of rosters. There's a big difference, though, between having him in a 10-team league right now and having him in a 15-team league right now. And I think in the former, that's where he's going to become available. In the latter, people are just going to choose their spots carefully, except not using him this weekend in many cases. He's got the Reds at home next time out. That should be a green light where he becomes available. At Atlanta, the start after that might be kind of borderline the same way that the Taj matchup against the Jays is. So you're still kind of picking your spots carefully with Max Meyer, but he's someone I'm watching to see if he pops up on the wire in a few of my more shallow leagues. And then the Hancock situation, I mean, very curious to see what the road start at the Angels brings. And then he's got Houston and San Diego. Houston at home, San Diego on the road. So not a bad stretch of schedule for Emerson Hancock to sort of follow up on what he did in that Sunday night matchup against Cleveland. Let's drop down to the next group, 20 to 40%. That's Max Scherzer, Lance McCullers, Eric Lauer, Brandon Sproat, Slade Ciccone, Michael McGreevy, and Landon Roop. Okay, now we're getting to some names that are more widely available. Sproat's been on the radar for a while because he was a prospect of the Mets, part of that big trade. First start didn't go well. that roster rate still seems pretty low to me. The velocity was there. Like, it just, the command was brutal. He really set himself up for a disastrous first inning and didn't really do a lot other than throw a ton of pitches. Like, they left him out there. They let him kind of wear it. So I guess from a workload perspective, the green light's still on. Like, they're going to let this guy go 5+ if he's efficient enough to actually do it. Who kind of pops for you from the 20 to 40 group?
Well, two names. One, Michael McGreevy. I mean, yeah, it's easy to say that because he had 6 no-hit innings against Tampa Bay, but just watching the work that he did, and they mentioned something in the broadcast talking about he's had 2 successful stolen base attempts against him in his career, and the fact that he's a righty and able to control the running game like that helps him. Maybe the Marlins should trade for him and help there in that capacity. But watching the way he pitched was impressive. And then Eric Lauer, he's a big part of why the A's have a 50 WRC plus because of the way Lauer pitched against them. So Eric Lauer stood out to me, and the matchups, the White Sox, Minnesota, and Milwaukee. And Milwaukee, neutralizes Jake Bauers. He's probably not in the lineup that day. And somebody who's, Mr. March, he had 9 home runs between spring training and regular season. So I love Eric Lauer out of this group.
Yeah, Lauer is just underrated all around. A lot of people may have picked him up already to stream him Saturday against the White Sox, but Twins at home, Brewers on the road the next couple of turns out there. Slade Ciccone, as many know, a favorite of Eno's. I think he's under-rostered at this point, and I'm genuinely curious about Landon Roop, too. I think he's someone that should see that number jump up, maybe closer to the 35 or 40% roster rate, so I would be interested in him where available. And the other guy that I'm kind of just watching and quietly rooting for, even though I have him nowhere, is Lance McCullers. He's also been through a lot in his career, well documented by Chandler Rome of The Athletic. Just, it'd be nice to see him put together a swan song where he's pitching well and contributing on this Astros team. We'll see him actually in Sacramento on Sunday, so he'll get a tough environment.
He's worth it. It's too bad it's Sunday. He's absolutely worth it for that matchup alone. And then if you could bench him, fine. But the fact he's pitching Sunday kind of takes that out of play, unless you already have him.
But streaming consideration, at least at Seattle for the start after that, and then he's home against the Rockies after he sees the Mariners. So a couple of spots where you could probably use Lance McCullers, even if you don't want him to stick around. The last group we have under 10%, or 10% and under to be more accurate for the sickos out there. I know you talked about Carmen Blodzinski during a panel at Sabre.
Yes, I did.
He's out there. Germán Marquez is out there. I imagine you're keeping with your original deep sleeper call and sticking with Blodzinski where available.
Yeah, so he is my Libertor. Blodzinski is my most rostered pitcher this winter, and I have had him everywhere. I was so encouraged. Like, he comes out, strikes out the side in the first inning, and I was like, victory lap, let's go. And the outing was still good overall, but he has been my most rostered pitcher. And I was taking him in drafting holds, took him in the WAR 15-team mixed league, took him there in like the 25th or 26th round. So I was grabbing him everywhere. I was very encouraged by what I saw of him. It was like more validation because you could see the only thing, the risk I have there with him is some of the work a lot of the work he was doing, rather, the success he had last year was when he was coming out of the pen versus the rotation. But he started in the rotation, stunk. They sent him down to Indianapolis, told him to work on some things, and then brought him back. And they used him in the bullpen multi-inning, and he looked great. So he didn't have the chance to roll that plan out into the starting rotation. One start in, looked good. So that made me happy. But like I said, I already have him everywhere. I think I'm like half of that 7% is because he's on my teams.
Yeah, I think he's interesting for sure. And that split kind of jumped off the page. The first time through the order, he was really good. And what I'm watching is to see like what happens. Can he get through 5 consistently? Can he execute the plan that you're talking about? Marquez made the rundown, though, because the next couple starts are actually good. It's a 2-step if you're in a weekly league at Pittsburgh, home against Colorado. So if you're in a 15-team league, maybe even a 12-team league, I wouldn't completely write off the possibility of Marquez being the last pitcher in your lineup this week. Widely available. One more quick break. When we come back, we'll take a look at a few relievers and a couple hitters of interest. This is Rates and Barrels. Welcome back to Rates and Barrels. We've got one more segment here. Obviously, some people out there are scrambling for saves because they didn't have enough coming out of their drafts, or maybe Carlos Estevez was cheap and they thought he'll be fine by the time the regular season starts. Nope. Velo's still down. He's on the IL right now. Maybe they were relying on Abner Uribe. The Brewers have been really kind of clear with Trevor McGill just being the closer right now as far as how they've used them through the first couple series. So you're chasing saves. And some of the names that I threw out there, Griffin Jax, still available in 41% of leagues. Robert Garcia, similarly rostered. Lucas Erceg kind of taking over that spot in Kansas City. Paul Sewald also available in about 45% of leagues. And then Jordan Romano also hovering around a 50% roster rate. All kind of similar in terms of limitations of some kind, either unknown job security, maybe stuff numbers that are lagging, flaws across the board, and then kind of below that, Matt Swanson looks like a cut to me, 31% rostered. I liked him on draft day. He's just not close up to the ninth inning right now. You can always try to pick him up later if things change, and that's entirely possible. Cole Sands is down there at 29%, Justin Sterner at 16%, Gregory Soto way down at 10%. Where are you taking shots if you're looking for saves this weekend? You're looking at some combination of those guys on your wire.
Yeah, so it pains me on the Justin Sterner because he's another guy I have everywhere, and the usage has been everywhere. He had a chance opening night, didn't convert it, and then he's pitched anywhere from the 5th to the 7th inning as the Athletics are still trying to figure out how they're going to put their bullpen together. But this would be a whole situation of perfect is the enemy of the good. As you said, all of these guys have flaws. Erceg would be my primary if I had the opportunity to do it, just for even if it's only for a couple of weeks. They did put Estevez on the IL with a bruised foot, a bruised ego. I don't know, whatever you call it, but bruised foot. And maybe that's why he's not able to use his lower half and generate the velocity he needs. We'll see. And that would be it. I mean, I'm not ready to walk away from Griffin Jax just yet. I know it's been a rough start, but the usage pattern, as we discussed earlier, it feels like they're setting this up for Brian Baker. I feel like this weekend will be the answer to that question with the matchups against Minnesota. Yeah, there should be some leverage close and late. We'll see who's being used when, but it feels like we'll get that question answered here this weekend about how Jax is going to be used by the club moving forward. They did talk coming into the season that they were going to committee it, that there was not going to be one primary guy. But I can't get past the fact that Brian Baker has not pitched since the last leverage game on Sunday. Is just still sitting there. It's like they're saying one thing, but their actions are kind of hinting at another.
Yeah, I think Baker, Erceg, and Garcia are probably the three that I'm most interested in from that group. More of the higher rostered guys of the bunch. If you said pick one from the bottom half, I guess it's Cole Sands, not because I love the skills, but because it does seem like he's getting a reasonable crack at the save chances of the Twins generate for now. But I'm not picking him up thinking I've solved my second or third source of saves the rest of the way, if that's the direction that I go. On the hitter side, a few names popping, way too many for us to cover all at once, but Jose Fernandez burst onto the scene for the Diamondbacks, so let's just bring him to the table. Like, what do you think the use cases are for picking up Jose Fernandez?
Somebody's going to spend some money this weekend doing that. And I think this would apply to all these hitters as a whole, like even like Liam Hicks and Joey Wiemer, all these things. But like we spend all of this time in the offseason, months doing work, looking at projections, and then somebody has a hot week and we throw like 3 months of work out the window and look at 1 week of results and say that's the new guy, right? That, like for Liam Hicks, for example, he's got 12 RBIs. He's leading the league in RBIs. Not a sentence I would ever imagine uttering at any point in the season, but he's leading the league in RBIs, and that's happening right now. But you look at the projections for him. The projections for him, his RBI total was like 38 to 43, and here we are at 12. So he's almost a quarter of the way there after 1 week. And so, what do you believe? Like this 1 week, and yes, none of that's sustainable, but it's just like how off were the projections? Projections on a whole are usually about 70% accurate, but in this case, you're basically looking at saying they were completely off, and this is never happening. And so it's like we make overreactions based off recency bias with this. And so like Joey Wiemer's bounced around the league since trying to, as he came up with Milwaukee, and he's made his way around. And I was in a 12-team NL only with 8-men bench draft last weekend, and Joey Wiemer wasn't even drafted in that. And there's a guy in that league who loves Joey Wiemer. And I even said, I cannot believe you didn't draft this guy. And he didn't even draft him. So it's just like we make these irrational decisions. But then I look at some of the most added, like I'm surprised that Jake Berger was even available. I mean, Jake Berger had that big year with Miami not too long ago, and he was there. Dominic Canzone had a really good close of the season and looked good in spring training. Jake Bauers looked great in spring training. So did Nolan Shonwell with the pitching, with the changes to his swing. So it's just like, I just caution people, don't, you spent 3 to 4 months doing all this work. Don't let 1 week of results and data change what you think about a player. Because you mentioned earlier, always keep an eye on the waiver wire to see who's being dropped, because somebody's going to make an irrational decision and believe that Liam Hicks is Cal Raleigh, and they're going to go out and dump somebody else, and that person is going to be available. So keep an eye on the waiver wire, but really think to yourself, do I want to cut a guy I took in the 15th round for a guy that was not even drafted and had a good week?
Right. I mean, I think in the case of hitters, especially, is Liam Hicks actually better than Dylan Dingler after a week? Like, probably not. Like, everything you thought you knew about those two players leading into this first week is still likely true. I did see Evan Carter dipping under 50% rostered. The Rangers have faced 3 lefties so far. Evan Carter has started against 0 of them. So my fear is that he's not getting to play center field just because of his defense. He's in a platoon, at least for now, and that changes the formats in which you can roster him. So whereas I thought there was enough upside for him to be useful in a 10-team league or a 12-team league on draft day, he's an early season cut in shallow leagues, even though I still really like him. You have to be very mindful of the schedule. The outfielder going the other direction that people are very familiar with from the prospect hype around him and what he did upon arrival is Jordan Walker. He's pushed up to 32% rostered on CBS. That number's probably going to keep going up because the StatCast page is still very convincing for Jordan Walker.
It is, and he's somebody I took in 2 leagues myself. Some of that based off, it's like last chance saloon for him. The Cardinals, I know we were kind of bashing on the White Sox a little bit, but they're a more competitive team year by year. And the Cardinals are in full rebuild mode, and they'll have that opportunity. And Walker should get more chances to stick with the lineup, whereas previously when they were pseudo contenders, if you will, they were quick to pull him from that. So I'm willing to take a chance that, like I said, the StatCast page just really sticks out. And one point, I'm glad you brought up Carter with the lefties. Obviously weather and all that comes to play, but I was looking at the projected starters for the next 2 weeks. The Rangers don't have a lefty. They're facing all righties. So if you want to get back in on the Evan Carter bandwagon, not to say that the matchups are easy. They're going to have Rhett Lauder and Chase Burns and Logan Gilbert and George Kirby and Brian Wu, Emmett Sheehan. Like, they've got some tough matchups, but they are all right-handed. So if you were dropping Carter because he's not playing against the lefties, if you want to take a run at him, this is a good time to do it because it's going to be all righties.
Yeah, good call. So more of a hold for now in some of those shallow leagues, potentially, with the matchups being what they are. But if he doesn't deliver what you expect, you can think about the schedule getting tougher eventually and maybe use him as a drop at that point. But at least he gets a good runway against a bunch of righties to get things back on track. But yeah, I just popped up Jordan Walker's page again on Savant, and it's just all red until you get down to whiff percentage, which isn't even horrible. 28.9% is something you can live with. I think when you pair the tools, the age, the pedigree with the story about him going to Driveline right away in the fall and retooling his swing, you could start to tell yourself a story that this is a player that's putting pieces together right now. And I think the Cards give him plenty of runway to prove that he can be on their next good team this year. Jason, I really appreciate the time, the insight. I thought we were going to go 45 or 50. We went an hour, of course, because I'm just built to talk for an hour, I guess, with every podcast that I start. But the question I have for you, best way to follow you, keep up with your work, how should our listeners do that?
Sure. So you can find me on Blue Sky at Jason Collette. I'm there. I am on the Sleeper in the Bus podcast with Justin Mason on Sundays. I know the last couple of Sundays have been irregular because I've been in different drafts, and so I haven't been able to record the past couple of Sundays. And then at RotoWire, the Collette Calls column typically runs on Tuesdays, and that is a weekly installment that I write about a variety of topics. Like I said, I'm going to look at the early batted ball data to see how the ball's behaving and how we may what we can expect for the rest of the season based off how that particular formula has worked here over the last 7-8 years, as we have looked at probably 3 different versions of baseballs over the years. I know Eno's listening to this going, but there's definitely been some varieties of baseballs, but early on, it feels like we are at some kind of stabilization point with how those baseballs are being produced, because the data certainly early on is saying that the ball is behaving very much like last year. But I'm anxious to dig into the data to see exactly how much.
Well, hey, the good news is the weather might be different, and with ABS, the way pitches are being located might be different incentive
I love
structures.
ABS, by the way. I love it.
I'm very happy with it so far. So I have no complaints. Players seem to love it. Everyone seems pretty happy about it. I would have guessed the umpires are generally not thrilled, but
CB Buckner's probably not thrilled with it, but
no. And hey, I do owe CB a get well after I referred to him as a human April Fool's joke. He took a fastball foul tip right to the mask, so I hope he's recovering well. Wish the man no ill will whatsoever. It
would have been easier to explain him thinking Jake Bauers didn't touch first base if like he was coming off that type, but those events happen in reverse order. So it's like I just thought it was funny. Pat Murphy and Kevin Cash were just laughing at the call. They're like, okay.
Yeah, they kind of both gave each other a look and both started cracking up, like they just couldn't believe that actually happened and needed to be challenged to get sorted out. But yeah, all the best to CB. Hopefully he's back out there doing his thing and maybe doing it better than ever as a result of ABS kind of nudging him in the right direction. You can also find Jason in the Discord, too. He hangs out in the Rates and Barrels Discord on occasion. Join the Discord with the link in the show description. Enjoy the games this weekend. Have a great holiday weekend. We're back on Monday. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to hit that subscribe or follow button so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed it, drop us a like, leave a rating, or sound off in the comments. We'll see you next time.